This is just to make an evidence that my collection of data with my subject of interest, Dominic Guzman, is happening, and we're gonna discuss some of the topics related to autonomous learning. Now, I was explaining Dominic before this that this interview is gonna constitute two parts. One, we're gonna focus on Dominic's language experience, and number two, we're gonna be more private. So I'm gonna maybe ask you about your family, your friends, and so on. Part number one is gonna be quite easy, just 5 questions. And part number two is gonna be more like a discussion. So let's start. So Dominic, question number one. Recall your learning experience as a language learner and think about when did you realize that your learning trajectory acquire autonomy?
Phew. Um, I think when I was about 16 years old, because when I was 16 years old, I started to take my own learning process when I learned English into my own hands. So I started watching TV series and using like a language diary where I would um, take notes of the words I didn't know in the series and movies I watched. And so then, because I wanted to perfection my English at the moment, and then when I was 16 years old, I realized that in reality it was up to me to learn English. No teacher or no professor of English could, you know, um, if I didn't want to learn, then no teacher would make me learn the things I didn't want to. So that's when I realized that my learning process is up to me.
When you were 6 years old?
No, 16. 16.
16 years old, and you
Yes.
realized that you wanted to learn the things that you wanted to learn, not the things that your teachers wanted to teach you.
Yes. Well, actually, yes, that's only part of the answer, but the other part is I wanted to learn more than what was being taught in schools. So, because I was already at a higher level back then in English than what was taught in schools, and I was more interested in things um, concerning, like, for example, private vocabulary. I don't know if this is clear, but there are different areas of vocabulary. They're like for job interviews and for school stuff and this and that. And I was more interested in the like colloquial vocabulary. So like how people talk in real life, not just like standard English, but like more casual ways of expressing things. So and that's because that is not something that was taught back then in schools. Um, yeah, I wanted to learn more.
All right. Now, number two, has any of your teachers, tutors, or language partners inspired you to be an autonomous learner?
Definitely. Yes, that's an absolute yes to that question. Um, I think mostly it was just my language teachers that really made me see that autonomy is an important part in the learning process. All of my other teachers, like biology teachers, mathematics teachers, or the subjects around the sciences, autonomy was never a case or never an important part in those subjects because all you could learn was the things that the teacher presented you in class. Like in biology, if you didn't know what the teacher, what the curriculum said that you had to learn this year, you didn't know where to start and how to go on. So you were always dependent on what the teacher wanted you to learn. But all my language teachers always put an emphasis on the autonomy part because we have an innate feeling or knowledge about what language is. So, for example, in biology, if you don't know what photosynthesis is, you couldn't all of a sudden have a realization and say, oh, I want to know what photosynthesis is. But in language, that's the case. You know how you talk in your mother tongue. You know that you can say certain things in your mother tongue. And if you didn't know how to say those things in the second or third language, you could simply ask yourself, well, what do I want to say in the second or third language? And then you can be autonomous and, grab dictionaries or go on websites and they translate those things. There's nothing that happens in like science subjects because if it were the case in science subjects, you would have to invent gravity yourself to know, what gravity is. But that's, if you're a child, that's not certainly something that happens.
And how do you think, or if you have any particular examples, did your teachers told you this is how you can be an autonomous learner, this is how you can independently learn the language? What did they do for you to be inspired?
Um, well, they always put an emphasis on like digital media and how you could make use of it for a second language because of course we're not living in countries where the main language is English or Spanish. So in those times, I mean 20 years ago it was different. You couldn't just open your computer and then you could listen to English, music or Spanish songs. But in our times, like 5 years ago, yeah, 5 to 6 years ago, well, yeah, 5 to 6 years ago, they always put an emphasis on digital media, like listen to music. You can improve while listening to music or watch series and movies. Actually, they always said like use watch series and movies to improve your English, even with subtitles. So yeah, music and movies and series, and also like vocabulary trainers like Bemmers and Duolingo. They also knew back then that
Mhm.
they existed.
All right. Now, number 3, in the case of learning a new language, would you consider introducing autonomy early on in your process or later on in your process?
Whew. Well, that's actually an interesting question because that's something I thought about myself because, as you know, I study pedagogy, yes. Um, and that's something I was interested because if you introduce it early on, the students might be overwhelmed with all the opportunities they are, and depending also on the age, you they have to have a certain competence in like digital media, but also in learning methodologies and strategies. There's like there's a huge like convolute. I don't know if that's the word in English, but of strategies and methods you could use and technologies you could use to learn things and to study things. But it takes a while to build competence in when to use when strategies. So that's something you have to be aware of also. You cannot just simply tell your students, well, this and that exists, this strategy and that strategy exists, but that doesn't make them know when to use those strategies and when to like balance. Okay, this strategy might be best when I want to do this, and this strategy might be best when I want to do this. So I think early on you should like introduce it. Um, um, in Spanish you would say poco a poco, like if you like one step at a time. Yes, exactly.
Mm.
And at the end, the students should be, this is my philosophy. I know other teachers might have other philosophies, but in my point of view, um, me as a teacher, I think I have the role to make students learn to learn things alone. I don't want that students be dependent on me for everything they want to know. So in the end, at the end of the years of the school years, my object, my goal is that all of my students have the tools and resources and competence to use a variety of strategies, that those may be books or like resources to look up books or digital media, online tools to learn languages. So I think, one step at a time,
All right.
introducing the strategies.
So you probably will agree that when in your case or in general, you think having a teacher is important early on when learning a new language.
Yes, definitely. And also, I mean, we all saw this in the corona pandemic that we all were connected on a digital realm. So everybody was connected in some way because the universities and school brought up, like made online platforms to keep everybody connected so everybody could learn. But also that went along with many like mental illnesses. So people got sicker, although they were connected on a on digital platforms. So I think one role of the teacher is not only to structure the process, the learning process in a way that students can, you know, find their own structure within the structure, because if there is no structure at all, so the teacher just lays all strategies and students can do whatever they want with the strategies and find out themselves what they have to learn within those tools. It is a lot is it is way more difficult if instead of the teacher puts a structure and the students can like get away with, from the structure if they want to, and also break the structure if they think that is necessary to learn something. And yeah.
All right. Now let's continue with question number 4. So, is autonomy an absolute term, or do you think autonomy has nuances?
What do you mean with absolute term?
For example, we have only black and white. We have no gray. In
Oh,
autonomy,
I see.
it could mean that you are completely autonomous. You don't need anyone. Or or maybe you can have autonomy while having a teacher. What do you think? Is autonomy straight on a single term or
I
is a
think
flexible term?
I think that autonomy is not an absolute concept in a way that you describe it, because most people, if you talk about freedom, people think, okay, freedom is the utmost goal that is to reach. But freedom cannot be freedom um, if there are no things that are not free to choose. Like, for example, you have a family. You cannot simply, if you are completely free, you're also free of your family. You're free of your home. You have no place where to live. You have no friends you can contact. You have no family to go to because you're completely free of all those structures that keep you within a certain kind of not freedom. And autonomy is, I think, exactly the same way. If you're completely autonomous, it also would contradict itself, because if you don't need anybody, that would mean you could not have the resources that created anybody. And so you would have to invent all the things yourself by looking at the things. And that's, I think, that would take you years or decades if you would do that, believing that autonomy should be completely like independent of anybody else. So I think autonomy, in a way that is that really helps you get forward, is dependent on other people. It's finding the structure within the structure. I think that's really a good expression. I came up with it now in that moment, but I think somebody would have said it in the past already. So I don't know if this is my copyright, but I like this the expression.
So
Find the
autonomy is
structure.
dependent on other people.
Yes, in a way, yes.
That's super interesting. All right. Now, let's continue with number 5. What is the role of pressure when dealing with an autonomous learning process?
Pressure? In what way pressure?
Well, probably when you're learning something, you feel a degree of pressure, whether it's by means of an autonomous learning process or by a teacher teaching you something. Do you think we should think about pressure when dealing with an autonomous learning process, or you should be completely relaxed?
Um, well, I think there are two kinds of pressure. There may be more, but according to those examples, I think two kinds of pressure are important. If you're learning something to get a grade, there's also like the motivation, the innate motivation or instrumental motivation, or external motivation. And pressure, in a way, if you're learning something for a teacher to get a good grade, or uh, to
Mhm.
yeah, get a good grade, the pressure is from outside. So the outside puts the pressure, the teacher puts the pressure, because you don't want to get bad grades. But if you're learning something for yourself, it is you who pressures you, because if there were no pressure, you could, be just nihilistic and think, well, whatever is, nothing is important at all. But when you learn something yourself, you put yourself under pressure, because that is the thing that keeps you forward. If there were no pressure at all, um, you wouldn't be learning this stuff, because if it's just unimportant to know the things you want to know, you wouldn't want to get forward and know the things or learn the things. So pressure, for example, in my learning process, I always pressured myself, because I wanted to in Spanish, for example, I wanted to know more than you know what was there, like in the schools, what was being taught. So I pressured myself, but I think that's like a good pressure. It's a pressure you can deal with better than when other people pressure you, I think.
You make me realize that you probably want to transform pressure into motivation. Is that correct? Or you still need to have some negative pressure to keep going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think if pressure and motivation are like two of a coin, like the two sides of a coin. On the one side is pressure, and on the other side it transforms to motivation. I think you cannot talk about bad pressure. I think that's kind of a good pressure. But
Good
yeah,
pressure.
yeah, yeah. And with motivation, it's also it correlates also with motivation, because intrinsic motivation is like the intrinsic pressure, kind of, putting that way. And extrinsic motivation is like the bad pressure. Well, I wouldn't write that in a scientific paper, but
Mm.
it's something that kind of, I think, correlates.
Let's try to make a difference between positive pressure and motivation. How would you make that difference?
Positive pressure and motivation. Well, well, I think when you talk about motivation, intrinsic motivation, you don't feel the pressure at all. It's just like playing, you know. You don't feel like, oh, now you opened a new topic to dive into, but yeah, I think if you're totally intrinsically motivated, you don't feel pressure at all. But sometimes it also happens that you feel the pressure within yourself, because it's not always playing. Although you're intrinsically motivated, sometimes it also can be, oh, I have to revise this because I forgot that. And although you like all this, the whole subject, you feel the pressure that you have to do this in order to keep on doing the things you like. So I think, well, yeah, with motivation, you don't feel the pressure at all.
Mm.
Although there is a pressure within yourself. Maybe, yeah, a pressure that keeps you going forward. That's actually what I want to say. Although you don't feel it, there's a pressure that keeps you moving forward, or an energy.
There's something that you say that's super interesting, and is that you think about motivation as something fun. It has certainly a fun factor, whereas positive pressure is still pressure, but it also motivates you to keep going on. However, pressure deals with your innate competence of diligence and being responsible. So I guess it's going that way. That's very interesting.
Mhm.
All right, that was
So,
it for part one. We talk mostly about languages. Now we're gonna talk about your personal experience, your personal life, your friends, your family, and so on.
wait, I'm going to, put on the lights so I can see you better.
So we know from various papers, especially from Ludwig and Lorwood, that autonomy, when you practice it when learning a language or learning another subject of matter, you also enhance and develop skills that you didn't thought about. For example, you could be more social, you could be um, more diligent with your home duties and so on. So my first question is, considering that autonomy can be holistic, do you think autonomy has contributed positively to your personal life?
Yes, definitely, I think so. I mean, I'm trying to think of areas early on. Yes, of course. I mean, I wrote music and composed music when I was 14 to 17 years old. So I couldn't have done that if I was not autonomous and decided myself to do it. And I think I'm just trying to think of examples, of concrete examples. Um, Positive contribution. Well, I think everything that you decide is autonomous in a way, because your decision, when taken autonomously or in a way so that it affects your life to be autonomous, um, is a decision that is autonomous and is not dependent on other people. Yeah. So
What about projects that, whether you have a small project or a really big project,
oh
do you
yes.
think autonomy has contributed to that uh, participation of the project, which in turn, if you didn't have that competence, you will never have completed that particular project?
Yes, of course. Now that you came up with that example, that's of course a big part of my life that autonomy plays a big role in, because I'm kind of a person that takes the thing into his own hands and, um, terminates or completes a task without other people. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing because whenever a problem occurs and you were not autonomous, then you have to be dependent on other people and the solutions of other people. Like, for example, write an email to a professor, or ask your parents, or ask your brother. But if you're an autonomous person, you see the problem and you also see a variety of solutions to the problem, and you can balance the solutions. Okay, this might affect the problem in this way, or this could result in this solution, and you can balance those strategies. And an autonomous person can decide from all the strategies that he or she possesses what strategy or technology or method to use to solve the problem.
All right. Now, in which dimension do you think autonomy has had the biggest impact in your life? Probably in your family, in your work, with your friends, with your mental well-being.
Mhm. Um, I think autonomy had the biggest influences on all the projects I did in my life, because every year I have kind of a project I put all my effort into, and all those projects I complete autonomously. I mean, like we talked about early on, um, with other resources, but I chose the resources to use to complete this project. And every year I start a new project because it keeps me going. It keeps me motivated. It's kind of like a hobby. Yes, like a hobby. Like you have the university and the things you gotta do in university, and my projects and my private life keep me going and keep me motivated in university. And that's, I think, the biggest part. Autonomy has an influence because my projects are like the biggest part apart from university. So,
But what kind of projects?
like for example, last year I made it to my project to gain muscle and to eat healthy and to just feel good, like water intake. Regularly, I drank 2 to 2.5 liters of water, and every day I ate healthy and and I measured my calorie intake, and every second day I went to the gym, and then I trained for 2 hours or sometimes even 3 hours, because I just knew what my goal was. And I had all those strategies and methods that I knew I could use to reach that goal, and that I applied them autonomously. So nobody told me, okay, I have to do this. So I investigated myself what to do, and then I balanced those strategies. Okay, those say this works, those people say that works, and then I decided myself what to try, and in a method of trial and error, then I through the process I saw what worked and what did not work, and so
Mm.
I adapted my process. Yeah.
That's a fantastic example. Now, considering that autonomy is a lifelong process, do you have any advice for people wanting to improve their autonomy?
Well, it depends what age they are, like, and what age they, how old they are. Should I talk generally or age specific?
You can make the differences in ages if you want. For
So,
example, for kids, I will recommend this. For adults, I will recommend this.
mhm. So I generally think that autonomy is something that develops kind of intrinsically within a human being. So that's you can improve it, and you can help people get more autonomous. But I think, I mean, we cannot prove it. We could prove it if we make people grow up totally isolated, but that's something we cannot prove. Um, or we could prove it if people would not go into schools, but that's something we can also not do. But I think generally we develop autonomy within a life. Like, that's not something you learn all of a sudden, and then you don't, and uh, then you manage it, or then you dominar, you
Hmm.
know. But okay, age specific. Let's start with children. Um, I think in children you can improve autonomy if you introduce it one step at a time. Like, give a task, and instead of giving them instructions to use this and that, like for example a written task to write something, and an unautonomous instruction would be to use this dictionary, or to use um, that pen, or you should not use colors, or you should not draw, or you should use this introduction, you should start with this words. And an autonomous improving instruction would be, you can choose whatever you want to complete the task. You just have to write 200 words. You have to write an email to a friend. You have to, like, some structures should be um, should be used, but they have more freedom to complete the task. They can choose whatever. They can choose, for example, if they want to write with a computer, or if they want to write by hand.
Mm.
So that's something. And I
Having
think,
options.
yes, yes. And with adults, there I'm having a much more hard time to come up with examples to improve autonomy, because adults always have to have kind of a structure, even also adults who go to university, they have a kind of structure they have to follow.
Mhm.
And I think you cannot be completely autonomous in university or in school, since you always have to follow a certain kind of structure. But in your private life, you can choose whatever you want to learn. And
Mhm.
I think one should make people know themselves more, like what they want to do in life. And that's, I think, the first step to to having autonomy in your private life. Because if you follow the rules of your parents are doctors, and then you might think, oh, I have to be a doctor myself. That's kind of an not autonomous decision, because you just follow into the steps of your parents, even though you're not made like it. So I think we should teach children and also adolescents, yes, to know themselves and to know what they want, and
Mhm.
to not just keep a structure they don't
Knowing
like for
yourself
example,
more.
knowing yourself more.
That's incredible. Very well expressed. Now, this is it for the interview. I really appreciate your help. Now I'm gonna stop recording.